Hoping to do three things today with you. One, if we had more time, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story. I think each of you has had a rich life and rich experience, and it's a good way for us to connect. And so I'll share a little bit of my personal story so you have a little bit of context to why I serve at House of Friendship, why I'm passionate about the work that we do there. Number two, some of you in this room are very familiar with House of Friendship. You volunteer there, you've served there. And then there's others of you that don't know much about it, so I'll just give a brief highlight overview. What I really want to do is have a discussion with you about, I call it the 3 E's of poverty. Why does someone end up walking through our doors at House of Friendship for food, for addiction treatment, for shelter? Just what are some of the factors that lead to it? And I'm still on my learning journey. I've been at House of Friendship for 13 years. And I tell people that I was a lot smarter 13 years ago. I had all the answers. I knew it all. And then I spent last 13 years of walking with the individuals we serve, serving with incredibly smart, compassionate people who have taught me so much, my team members. And so this is where I'm at today. Some of the learning, some of the reading I've done, I want to share with you. And it's not the gospel. It's just, here's where I am. And maybe if you talk to me in 5-10 years, it'll probably evolve a bit more. But I wanted to share with you some thoughts and ideas of where I've kind of landed. And I'm hoping then we can have a discussion. Okay? So this isn't a 2-hour sermon. So for those of you who are waiting for that, I hate to disappoint you. I'll give you some stuff to think about, and then any questions, comments. You're reading a lot of stuff in the paper. I'm pretty sure you're going to have a few difficult questions for me, and I'm good with that. So 3 things: personal story, a little bit of House Friendship, and then the 3 E's of poverty. Are we good with that? Okay. Awesome. Let's jump into it. So turn this on. Can all of you see that picture? Okay. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that 10-year-old is headed for success. He's got a 3-piece suit. His Oma did a beautiful bowl cut for him. And look at that bike. How many of you had a bike like that when you were younger? How many of you wish you had a bike like that when you were younger? Right? The banana seat. Now look carefully, folks. It's got rear blinkers left and right. It's got a headlamp, rear view mirror. I mean, this thing had it all. The trouble with this picture is that it's a complete lie. I was not a happy 10-year-old boy. I didn't have life together. You see, there was something that happened in my past that probably some of you in this room share with me from our heritage that devastated our families and changed the course of history forever. My Opa on the left, my Oma on the right were separated right at the beginning of World War II, 8 months after the birth of my dad. And so Opa then got taken away. Women and children got displaced everywhere. So my Omas ended up more in Kazakhstan. My Opa fled, and again, some of you might share this history, up from the rubble, made it to Germany through MCC, came to Canada, settled in the Niagara area, got remarried, found out his first wife and son were still alive after that. So, it's not an uncommon story, unfortunately. This is the devastation of war. Many of us in the room are products of that, and why it breaks my heart till this day every time I hear about the war currently going on and all the wars going on in the world. This changes our families for generations. It impacts us in different ways. And again, I'm guessing some of you share this story. So, Dad grows up, gets married. My sister and I bless our children, or bless my parents with our presents. And so Dad The jokes are subtle, folks, so you got to pay attention. They're really subtle. So thank you for being awake. So Dad applies year after year after year. I mean, from the age of 10, he knows he's got a father in this mythical land called Canada. He just wants to be reconnected with his father. So he applies every year, gets accepted by Canada, gets turned down by the Russian government. As a complete and utter frustration after 13 years of trying, my dad applies to come to Canada in 1979 with his 5-year-old son. For whatever reason, God's leading, something happened, the Russian government, communist government, approves a 39-year-old man to leave Russia with his 5-year-old son in 1979. We came for 43 days. Now, I'm a 5-year-old kid who's never seen indoor plumbing, no phones, handful of toys. We played soccer on dirt roads, and I'm in St. Catharines, Ontario, going to Niagara Falls, Marineland, Toys R Us. My 39-year-old father, who's been told under communist rule for 39 years, you live in the best country, is now on Canadian soil for the first time in his life and experiencing that. So just trying to process all that. My father gets followed by the KGB for the following next 2 years because they don't appreciate my dad's, the mistruths that he's spreading. Mistruths? How was Canada? It's fantastic. It was a great country. They really didn't want that shared. So, 2 years later, we were granted permission to leave, and we were thrilled. So this was us coming, this was our last picture out of Russia, and then our first church directory picture. Oh, aren't those great pictures? Don't you miss them with those backgrounds? So here we are, father and son are reconnected after 40 years of being separated. Everything's good, right? It's 1981. So I land on the school playground assuming life is going to be just like back in Russia, where we looked after each other, we helped each other. It was all about community. It was all about all of us bringing our gifts. If you know how to fix a car, you would help me. If I had some extra meat, I would bring that to you. It was all about gifts, talents, sharing that with each other. Kids ran freely on the streets. Neighbors looked after each other. So I assumed Canada would be like that. Imagine, to my surprise, my first day at Memorial Public School in St. Catharines, when a child looked at me and said, "You're a piece of crap, you don't belong, the language you speak and the country you're from," and my parents told me I'm not allowed to talk to you. So, when you're a little kid, and you get that message day in and day out, and you get called a dumb Russian and every other name, because in the 80s, everyone was taught to hate people from Russia, it shapes you. And again, I know there are people in this room whose stories mimic that, and things you had to experience when you immigrated here. And so you ask me, why am I so passionate about House of Friendship? Because every day at House of Friendship, the people we serve, and currently we serve about over 42,000 people annually here in Waterloo Region in one way or another, with food, shelter, housing, addiction treatment. We're in every low-income neighborhood in Waterloo Region working with new Canadians, with children and youth. And the people we serve get told every day, you don't belong. There's something wrong with you. You're an addict. You're a homeless person. I don't like the country you're from. I don't like the faith you have. And so every day, myself, along with 300 colleagues, and over 1,000 volunteers get to do something about that. And we get to say to those individuals, no, you do belong. And so I get to be a part of that every day, and that is a huge, huge honor and privilege. It's difficult, it's stressful, but as you can tell from my personal story, you can understand why that matters. So, a little bit about my story. Are you still with me? We're done number 1. Number 2, we're going to go quick here. How many of you have some familiarity with House of Friendship? Okay, quite a few of you. Can you still hear me? How's my volume? Oh, now I'm too loud. Okay, how's that? Good. Okay. Jeanette here serves at House Friendship, and she just went through a whole orientation at House Friendship last week. And what I always say to new team members at House Friendship, the most important thing is, the reason we are here serving at House of Friendship today is because 83 years ago, a small prayer group of women came together around a table, just like you gathered today, in the economic depression. And they started seeing things they had never seen in their community, right? They started seeing hobos and transients, as they were called back then. And individuals who had no family, had no work, because there was no work, there was nowhere for them to go. These women could have continued praying and stayed comfortable. But instead, they did an incredible act of humility and hospitality. And that is, they said, we can't change the world, but there's got to be something we can do. And they invited those that were unwelcome everywhere else to this table. And that is why we're here today. Because this small group of women invited 6 or 7 individuals in for a meal. So 83 years later, we're serving 42,000 people in many different ways, but it would have never happened had it not been for this small prayer group of women. And that history continues. If you look at everything we do at House of Friendship, it's because 1 or 2 people came together and said, I see a need in the community, we've got to do something about it, let's try. We don't have the answers, but let's just try. So, how many of you remember Kitchener Dairies? Yeah? And Gibson Washers, and so the Bingaman family gave us a storefront in 1939, and that's where we started. Today, just to locate this, if you can picture King Street where the record is, across the street there's a parking lot, so that's where that building is. My favorite part is the Ion was here back when we started. That really is my best joke for the morning, so I'm glad it landed. I'm always worried that doesn't land. Anyways, are there any accountants, numbers people in the crowd? Okay, I always want to humor the accountants, so just quickly, we serve 42,000 people. We have a staff team of about 300. Pre-COVID, we had about 1,700 volunteers, some of you in the room, that help us carry out the mission, and we're currently around 18 to 20 million overall annual budget. Does that feel good, having those numbers? Oh. See, the accountants, they're skeptical. He didn't just say yes right away. He paused, he waited. All right. So just quick overview. We do 4 main things. We do not try to be all things to all people. We want to lead in 4 areas. We want to do them well, and we feel like that is the best way we can contribute to this community. Food. We are the largest food provider in our community. The food bank that we helped start in 1982 collects all the food in our community but does not distribute the food to anyone directly. 60% of the food from the food bank ends up at House of Friendship. A lot of it ends up at our emergency food hamper program on Guelph, where every day we see anywhere from 100 to 120 families walk through our door to get emergency food, probably a basket of food for about 3 to 5 days. We also do food, neighborhood food distribution. So in 6 different low-income neighborhoods, every week, once a week, we provide food to the neighbors. Why? A, because they're hungry and they need it. B, we use food as a mechanism to build community. Just as you did this morning, having coffee and food, we believe if we just give food, then it's transactional. But if we can share food and bring neighbors together, then that is a way to build community, to build connection, to build friendship, so people feel like they belong, they're not lonely, and connect. So a little bit about our food work. Shelter and housing is what most people know us for, because that's where we started with a shelter on Charles Street. That has radically changed now, and you've probably read a little bit about in the paper. We bought a hotel in Waterloo, and we're going to be opening that up in January. I'll maybe get into that a bit later. We also have supportive housing. We have 2 buildings, Eby and Charles Village, and we have a vision to build another building on that site, hopefully starting next year. Addiction treatment, we're the largest adult addiction treatment provider in Waterloo region. So we have a few sites, one in Cambridge for men, residential, women here in Kitchener. We offer individual counseling, group counseling, support for families, We will support people after they've received addiction treatment to get housing. So it's kind of the whole continuum for individuals struggling with addiction. The last piece that a lot of people don't know about us, it's very close to my heart because it's preventative. We can provide shelters and addiction treatment, but that means we didn't do something for that individual in time, and that's why they ended up where they ended up. If we really want to address some of the challenges we're having in our community, we focus on children, we focus on youth, we focus on families living in poverty, because if we can prevent some things here, then later we won't have to do those things. So we are in every low-income neighborhood across Waterloo Region. We have staff working with families, with kids growing up in poverty, and we try to help them, new Canadians, families growing up in poverty. So that's kind of an overall. How many of you knew House of Friendship is involved in all of these areas? A few of you did. Okay, good. So I could go on, but that gives you kind of high level. We're good. Go on the website, there's lots more information. Yeah, just quickly, we've had a vision to say, listen, providing shelter the way we used to, just providing someone a bed and a meal does not work in today's context. The drugs on our street today are doing such horrendous damage to individuals. People are so unwell. The level of mental health and unwellness on our streets is nothing like I saw 13 years ago when I started. So when things change, solutions have to change. So we have said, listen, we need to have healthcare right in our shelters. And so we piloted some stuff during the pandemic. You probably read about us moving into the Radisson Hotel, and then we're at the Inn of Waterloo. So now we have a permanent site, the Comfort Inn in Waterloo. We're just finishing renovations, and this is our best attempt to try to address the needs of the individuals on our streets today. So there will be medical folks on site, there will be addiction treatment, there will be mental health supports. We're going to try to do what we can. So we're learning, we're innovating, we're trying. Nobody has the answer these days, folks. Anyone that tells you they have the answer to the problem, don't believe them, because they'll sell you snake oil as well. We're also on our Charles Street campus have a vision to add more supportive housing. So we're hoping to build 72 units of housing in downtown Kitchener. But we also want to go beyond housing. We want to have other items on site, a full medical clinic, a cafe, a gym, and we want this building to benefit the folks that are living at EB and Charles. So there'll be about a community of about 150 people living on this block. So we got a few things going on. Apparently there was a pandemic that our team had to get through as well. But that gives you kind of an idea of some of the stuff we're working on and doing that. Okay, we've already accomplished 2 out of 3, folks. We're doing great. And my volume's probably just perfect, right? You see, I knew it. Okay, are you still with me? Let's go to the last one. Why does someone end up on our streets? Why does someone find themselves in a not so great situation? And so I want to talk about economics, environment, experience. Those to me seem to be the 3 factors of why individuals end up walking through our doors. I want to start with economics. If you were born in Britain in the 40s, in a particular part of Britain, you were automatically put in a lifelong study. And that study is going on till this day. So those of you born in the 40s, those folks are being tracked. And then there was another study that started in the 50s, 60s. My whole point is the Brits have these longitudinal life studies, and by now they've got over 70,000 people that they've been following. And the really interesting thing is, let's say you guys were part of that study, is now we kind of know how your life turned out. But we could go back and we could say, what kind of conditions were you born in? What was the home like? What was the economic situation? What was the parenting like? And so basically, can you imagine 70,000 people? Like, that is some really good data. This isn't just made up stuff. And lo and behold, the data on kids growing up in poverty isn't all that great long term. Because kids that grow up in poverty don't have the same advantages, don't have the same opportunities, right? So not surprising that if you grow up in poverty that you're going to have some challenges ahead of you, right? We can all do that. I know where your mind is going because I had this conversation with my dad. He's like, I grew up in poverty. I grew up during the war. You know, single mom, poverty, hunger. What's wrong with the people you serve at House of Friendship, John? And there's plenty of you probably in this room that did not grow up with a lot, and you did great. You raised wonderful kids, good home, job, all that. Here's what I said to my dad. And I introduced him to a concept called buffers. And I said, Dad, here's the difference between you and the gentleman that's staying at our shelter right now. You're right, you both had horrendous childhoods, you had lots of trauma, you had lots of challenges. But in the midst of your most difficult time, in the midst of that war, when there was no food, there was nothing except for like half of a piece of bread, you got that piece of bread and your mom went hungry. Your mom prayed for you, she sewed for you, she looked after you, she did everything for you. You had a buffer in life. The people, for example, in our shelter, they had challenge after challenge after challenge, and they just kept hitting a cement wall, and there was nothing that came in that buffered. There wasn't that teacher that said, hey, I see you, and I see some of your gifts, and I'm going to go a little bit out of my way to help you. They never had that neighbor who said, oh, I think this family's struggling and they don't have enough food, so we're just going to drop a little food off at their front porch. They didn't have a faith community or church community that supported them and encouraged them. There was just no buffer. And they just kept slamming into a cement wall over and over and over. So, just something for you to think about, and I'm going to be coming back to the buffers. So I want to be very clear. Growing up in poverty is not a death sentence, but it is a risk factor. You have greater risks growing up in poverty than when you don't. Okay? So that's the first E, economics. Still with me? Okay. We got two more. Environment. No child asked to be abused. No child asked to grow up with violence. No child asked to be mistreated. But it happens. And you and I all know that. And there's probably some of you in the room here today who did not grow up in a great environment and had some very difficult challenges. I want to be clear again. Just because you grow up in a terrible environment or abusive or, your parents had a not so great marriage is not a death sentence, but it is a risk factor. Unless you have buffers. So there are kids who go through terrible things, but you know what? They get access to certain counseling, or they get treatment, or they have an aunt or an uncle or some sort of buffer in their life. What I want to do with you is I brought a copy. I did not realize so many of you would come. I thought you'd see my name and then half of you would stay home. You thought about it, and you're like, oh, but there's coffee, Gareth is going to play the guitar, it's going to be good singing, let's come out. So thank you for your honesty. So I brought 25 copies. Some of you grab, and you don't give it out now because then they won't listen to me. They'll start reading it. Don't do that, Pastor. It's called the ACE Study. Have any of you heard of it? probably one of the most important studies ever done. It's already been around since the 80s. There's so much research behind it. Research after research after research. When you learn a bit more about the ACE study, you will look at your own life differently, and you will look at your health differently, and you will look at other people's health a little differently. So what is the ACE study? ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's just 10 questions. Before the age 18, did you experience any of the following? I'll just read you one sample question. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? 10 questions, yes or no. I'm willing to bet most of us in this room will probably score 0. Maybe 1, maybe 2. If you score, 1 or 2, you're okay. As soon as you start, a lot of the people that we serve score like 6, 7, 8 yeses to these questions. And research is clear that actually if you say yes to about 6 or 7 of these, you have about a 1,300% increased chance of being an intravenous drug user. Okay? So the ACE study helps us kind of understand. The really interesting thing about ACE is now cancer researchers, diabetes researchers have now said, taken people's ACE results, and they have made a direct correlation that actually the higher your ACE score is, the more vulnerable you are to cancer, to diabetes, all these other health issues. You see, we've never done that. We always want to talk about genetics. We always want to think about your diet, your exercise, because that's stuff we can talk about. We want to talk about things we can give a pill to or a machine can fix. But adverse childhood experiences, well, a CT scan's not going to pick that up. We don't want to talk about it. And your doctor's not trained to talk about childhood trauma. They're trained to give you a pill, to take your blood pressure. And so isn't it interesting that our ACE score actually will impact our long-term health probably more than so many other things. So that's why I'm saying you'll probably change the way you look at health. So I hope you take the time to, so I've given you a handout so you can do the study yourself. And if you Google CBC ACE study, there was a brilliant little podcast done, I think 3-part series, a number of years ago on a CBC show, and it explains it so well. So I'll just throw that out. Now, I talk about the ACE study. I've got a young guy in his 30s. He's got a really good career at the University of Waterloo. He's married. And he says to me, he says, John, I went home, I did that study, I got 7 out of 10. And he said, look at me, I've got a great job at the university, I'm married. What's wrong with the people that you serve? And he emailed me the next day and he said, no one ever explained the concept of buffers to me. He said, I was just no different than the guys at your shelter, but I used to look down upon them because look at me. I turned out they didn't. He said, no one ever told me about buffers. He said, yeah, I had 7 out of 10, but I went home that night and I thought about all the different buffers in my life, the teacher, the Boy Scout leader, the neighbor. He said, I couldn't believe the number of people I had in my life. Yes, my own family life wasn't great, but I had all these other pieces. And he said, I never thought of it. He thought he did that himself, right? This self-made individual. It's a load of crock. So I'll just leave you with that for environment. Okay? Lastly, because I really want to get to discussion. How long? We're here till 3 in the afternoon? Till 3? At least till 3. So I can take... Pastor, what do we...
I think lunch is at noon.
Oh, okay. So we're doing well then, because I'm almost done, and I really want to have kind of the open conversation with you. Okay, great. That was a joke about the 3 o'clock. Just relax. Okay. So some of you are saying, okay, but I didn't grow up in poverty. I had a great family environment. And they still end up walking through our doors. So what's that all about? Sorry, Gareth, is it okay that I keep walking around?
I'm proficient at this.
You're proficient? Well, that's good. I think it's excellent. We have a skilled videographer. And he's a pastor. Like, wow. I didn't know pastors could be this talented, have multiple talents. So, anyways, I digress. Here's the reality is that bad things happen to good people every day. You know this as a faith community. You've helped each other weather tragedy in each other's lives. Things happen that we could have never expected or planned for. And yes, you would hope when that happens, there are buffers in one's life. A strong faith community, a strong family, whatever. But some people, regardless of even buffers or no buffers, just cannot make it back from that experience, and it changes them forever. So we have a great example playing out across North America right now. We've got young people, didn't necessarily grow up in poverty, had good families, are working hard, whether it's on oil rigs and construction, they got injured, they went to their doctor, and they got prescribed an opioid. And I can't tell you how many of these stories are out there where it started with one painkiller and it has led to death. And we're seeing it across all of North America these days. I want to share with you a story about Shane. And Shane is my age, or was my age. So when Shane passed away in our shelter, in the bathroom of our shelter, about 6-7 years ago, that sort of shook me. And I didn't get to know him super well, but he was just, there was a dynamism to him. There was life in his eyes. He just captured you. And so when I got the note that he had passed away, it impacted me. And so thankfully over time, his family was outside of our community, so they didn't really know much about us. So they came and visited us, got to know us. And I'll never forget the day I'm standing in the shelter room with his 3 younger siblings, and our shelter workers telling the siblings, boy, your brother was a slob, he always had pop under the bed, and his siblings smile, and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys actually knew our brother, he was a slob at our house too, and we were just getting to know the family, and we knew what Shane liked and the things that he enjoyed. And then at one point I just looked at the siblings and I said, you guys sound like you have an incredible family. And the siblings said, we do. I said, so how did we get here? How did we get, dad's a pilot, mom's an emergency department nurse, great family, cared, no poverty, no abuse, no bad environment. How did we get to your 42-year-old brother dying in the bathroom of our shelter from an overdose? And they said, John, we do have a great family. Shane finished high school, started working construction, had an injury. It wasn't even a major injury, it was a minor injury. Doctor right away prescribed painkillers. He said he got addicted to them, and then he went on to more heavier stuff. And he said, we looked after him for 10 years. We tried our best, John. We did everything we could, but it just got so bad. And he said, and that's why for the last 2 years you've been looking after him. We couldn't do it anymore. We have young kids, we had drugs everywhere, and we did not know what to do. So, experience. Just because you've got a great family, everything is going your way, doesn't mean something can't happen tomorrow. Right? All of our lives could be changed tomorrow if our spouse got hit by a drunk driver, or if one of us wakes up and we've got a significant mental health issue, a marriage breakdown. None of us we're all vulnerable. But some individuals think, no, those people that you serve, they're different. That can't happen to me. And I guess I'm here to say after 13 years of being there, I have learned and been humbled to know that we're all in the same boat, folks. I used to think we weren't. We are. Some of us are a little luckier. Some of us have a few more buffers. And some of us just, life has gone a certain way. Have any of you read Ragged Company? Yeah, a few of you. It's got colorful language in it, so I will give you that heads up. But written by Richard Waughan, he's one of Canada's great Indigenous authors. And if you remember there's 4 characters, right, in Ragged Company, and one of them wins a $13 million lottery ticket. And the story goes from there. And it's kind of, the story, I love it because every chapter's, it's the same occurrence, but it's shared from 4 different lenses. So here's 4 people on the street and they're kind of sharing their own experience of the same thing. Do you remember 3 of those individuals, I know, you probably read this like 10 years ago and I'm testing you, but 3 of those individuals were there because of their environment that they grew up in and economics. Like some of them grew up with poverty, they didn't have great, but there was a 4th character, I don't know if you remember him. He had a great life, everything was going along. He didn't fit on the street, but he ended up there because he had something very, and I don't want to ruin the book for you, but life was going along great and he had a tragic experience in life that he never recovered from. So economics, environment, experience. They're not death sentences. They are risk factors, buffers. Okay, folks. I hope I've got a few brain cells fired up. Hopefully the coffee did a little bit of that, but I hope this did as well. And so now, I want to turn it over to you to say, does that make sense? Is that helpful, or do you disagree with any of it? So I want to open it up for discussion. I've been chatting long enough. So we'll start there. Comments on the economics, environment, experience, and then we can kind of, if you want to digress and ask about broader things in the community, any other issues. But I want to start with the economics, environment, experience. What did that tweak for you? Does it resonate?
I think it's very insightful. Thank you so very, very much. Would I cut somebody off?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
My name is Don. I really appreciate the presentation. Very, very insightful.
Okay.
The last two.
I haven't done that. You get caught yet. It could still go down. Right?
And I'm here just learning about the French. I've been aware of it.
Right.
Just learning, and this is very, very helpful.
Okay.
And I will say too that I drive part-time for Country Mile bus nights, who shuffled some of your staff to the Guelph when
Yep.
Guelph was here. And I have to say again, as a driver, I'm quiet, but I appreciated their conversations, their dedication, their desire to learn and study, and to care for the residents. It was all of us drivers, it was very impressive to us, your staff.
Don, thanks for making that connection. Appreciate that. If you wanted to say something.
I probably have had the same questions. Why are they there? Why did they get to this stage? This has been a little more helpful to me to understand mostly that they didn't have the cushion. But I still look at the way we're treating people, providing these drug addiction places, to me is just helping them out. Like, I don't understand that part.
Okay. So, did everyone hear that? So this whole part of, you're hearing a lot about consumption treatment sites, harm reduction, is that okay. I'm gonna tackle that head on. But that's gonna take us in a whole different direction, because that's a hot button one. So, no, I'm good. I love it. I love that you asked. I just want to finish up on anything else from economics, environment, experience. Because I'm happy to talk about consumption treatment sites, encampments, all the stuff that has a lot of controversy, and would love to. But I just don't want to just kind of lose this strain. There's others.
I didn't know that you worked with young people. How do you do that?
Yeah, so the largest population that we work with are children and women. I know most people think it's men because of the shelter, but yeah, no, the largest group we work with children and youth. So we started very small in 1985. Barb Wise drove into Chandler Mowat community and saw a lot of poverty, saw a lot of crime, a lot of distrust. So Barb worked out of the trunk of her car, and this is so many programs that House Friendship. It was one person that saw something and just did something, and started mobilizing, started inviting faith communities to help out. She brought resources in, and then we were asked to join, and that's how we got into what I call community development, where we actually go into a low-income neighborhood and we just start bringing in resources, listening to what the community needs. Sunnydale started in 1999, you know, Janet, you've been there, like, we just start small, and then it was like, oh, well, Chandler Mowat, well, can you help in this community, can you help in this community? And so 30 years later, we now have some presence pretty much in any neighborhood, rural, urban. We have a family outreach work team where they cover the whole region, where they will meet with you know, a family from Mexico in a rural part of Elmira and kind of help that family with resources for their kids, or, you know, in Cambridge, like whatever the family needs, we try to work with. It's really important work, but it doesn't get a lot of airtime because what everyone wants, like, it's what you see, right? The encampments, the homelessness, that's what gets in the paper. But the incredible work of, you know, the little kid that just came from a war-torn country and is now getting, you know, help in the community, is playing soccer and meeting other kids in that neighborhood and feeling like he or she belongs. That story never makes it to the paper, but I can tell you that story is happening right now as we sit here every day across all these communities, because we've got a pretty large team in our community services group. Ms. Boston.
I'm really bothered about the addictions that happen as a result of prescription drugs. Do doctors, you know, surely doctors must be aware of what happens. Do they not closely monitor and, like, is there not a way to prevent these prescription things from going too far? I'm thinking of my own son, for example, who had a really bad break on his leg, and it was, you know, he ended up with rods in his leg and things, and he was given a prescription, something similar to
Oxycontin, yeah.
But he was so aware of what this could do that he limited his intake as much as he possibly could and just put up with the pain. I'm just, like, bothered by that the medical profession is not being more cautious.
Yeah. So in about the 60s or 70s, we started this trend. I don't know if it's wider in North America, but I know it was in North America. I'm pretty sure when most of you were growing up, the doctor didn't ask you, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your pain? Did the doctor ever ask you that when you were younger?
Did you go to the doctor?
You can go to the doctor, right? Now, that's a common question. So what's that all about? So somewhere in the 60s, 70s, societally, we said, pain is bad, it should be minimized, and we should get rid of it. And so we sort of set the ground for that, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, how do we minimize pain? Let's develop drugs, because there's a real market for it. And that's where Oxycontin was born, right? In the 90s, it was like this miracle drug. We promise you it won't be addictive, and you deserve not to be in any pain. And so for 15 years, until about 2010, when finally people woke up and saw the devastating effects, but it was too late then. We had millions of people across North America addicted, but it still happens till this day. Someone, I mean, how many of you had a surgery recently? And like, what kind of prescription did you get? Someone was telling me the other day they went in just recently.
T3s, but I didn't take it.
Yeah, but they got, I think, 70 painkillers for a fairly minor operation. So it's still, like, it's still happening, and this stuff is potent. So So I don't like always just pointing one finger one way. I mean, usually people act in a way that the environment rewards them for it. So if there's an environment where we don't want to have pain, and patients are saying, I don't want to have pain, and there's an economic model that rewards the doctors for that, it's going to happen. Yes?
60 years ago, when I was a teenager, our church from this area used to once a month go to Harbor Rescue Mission in Hamilton and put on a service. And the thing was, the local street people had to come and listen to a gospel message
Right.
before they got a bowl of soup. Can you comment on that?
Sure. You're like, I'm going to compete with her. She asked him about the injection stuff, about addiction. Now I'm going to, yeah. I mean, that's a whole broader topic. I think you're saying, how do we, that didn't work either. The coming and singing at the guys never appreciated that. It was never about, it was about us feeling better and making ourselves feel better. Like, oh, we did outreach, or, you know, we sang to the poor. Like, it was never about them, it was about us, if we were honest. But we were well intentioned, right? We think if we can sort of share faith, maybe this will be a buffer in their life to help them or something. Like, it's all well intentioned. But good intentions have their dark sides too, and we need to think that through sometimes. So, if what's really behind your question is how does House of Friendship still kind of balance this out of sharing faith and in the mission, and how do we balance that out? I don't know if that's where you're going with your question. But I mean, I think we always have to ask ourselves, is this about the people we're serving, or is this about us? Because I find sometimes a lot, what we do as Christians is we do things to make ourselves feel better. Because really addressing the needs of our most vulnerable and our homeless and people with mental health and addictions, that is really, really hard work. But we sometimes want to do things in churches so we can just say, well, we're doing something, right? We gave a little bit of food. It's sometimes just to appease our own conscience. But if you really want to do this kind of work, you gotta get in there, and it's gritty and it's hard, and it's like I said to you, you have all the answers initially, or you base it on what you read in the paper, and then as you get more and more involved, you start realizing, hey, there's more layers. This is harder than I thought. Janet, maybe you could answer the question. I mean, you got involved in Sunnydale Community, right? And that's when I first met you about 12, 13 years ago. I mean, what was your journey like from how you grew up, and then all of a sudden now interacting with people from different cultures, faiths, poverty?
I learned a lot from them. Sitting with them, a very kind lady invited me to sit with a group of women. She saw something in me that I didn't see, that I could bring to the table, and she created a place for me to be there. But I had all the answers because I grew up in church all my life, right? But I needed to be silent for probably the first 6 months and just listen, because these people are not all wrong, you know, in what they believe or how they do, how they act. I would say I've learned more by sitting with them and showing hospitality to them and loving them than I've given to them. Yes, I've been able to give some.
So thank you. If you come with a spirit of humility, curiosity, I think you can be changed yourself. I think too often we come and we say, well, we've got the answers, or that, you know, they just need X, and that will be, and that's where I see kind of the old mission days really being detrimental. But hospitality, humility, curiosity, if you bring that, it will change you, and it could change the other person. And I don't know how many people like Janet have said to me, I thought I was in there to help them. They actually helped me instead. I was just at a funeral last week for a long-term volunteer at a food hamper program. And it's interesting, there was just 15 of us there. This individual had no family, couldn't pay for the funeral, so the region had to pay. So it was a very simple casket. You know, there was no fancy church service. It was just outside. And it was fascinating, the 15 people that were there. 6 of us were from House of Friendship. Most of the were folks that worked with her at the food hamper program. We ended up being the pallbearers. And 3 were from the faith community, and they were all individuals who looked at her as a project years ago and said, you know, we're going to help her, we're going to change her, you know, she doesn't know certain things. And all 3 of them said, in the kind of sharing time around, they said, you know, I think we learned a lot more from her than what we taught her. And they built a beautiful relationship, but it was different than what any of them expected. The other 6 people, young women that lived in the same building as this woman, who are going through very tremendous hard life, and all of them were bawling. They said this individual cared so much for us, looked out for us. She didn't have any money, but she did little things that made them feel safe, cared for. And so I ask you, I mean, yeah, she didn't sit there in church every Sunday morning necessarily, but what she was doing day in and day out in her life, I think we could learn from. So, thanks for the setup, and thanks for rescuing me. So, you don't need the age requirement, so I'm going to go back here, and then we're going to go back.
Okay, my question has to do with the opioids, or from doctors and oxycodone. If a person takes it, they have a greater risk of going into drug addiction. That's in the longer term. But my question is to do with the federal government a number of years ago legalized the sale of cannabis in stores in Oakland. Based on your experience, has that increased your chance of going into addiction in the longer term? I don't know.
Legalization is not the problem. We can go on for a bit, but I'll just leave it at that. And then maybe I'll tie it in with some of the questions. I won't forget this, because I do want to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I guess maybe more of a personal question, but what were some of the buffers that you discovered, especially after Shane? I don't remember the weekend, but it comes in 3s, next week another 3, like it's an epidemic, right? And so what were some of the things that you discovered, and maybe perhaps your staff discovered, that were maybe buffers that you found and are thankful for, but buffers that perhaps weren't there, that you had to create or are still discovering for workers and for vicarious trauma?
Oh, wow. Good question. So sorry, buffers for the people we serve?
Buffers for you.
Or buffers for us as those of us serving and seeing this kind of stuff?
Because I'm sure entering a bathroom was never the same after Shane.
Oh, now I'm with you. Yeah, folks, I don't have the answer to that. What's your name?
Mike.
Mike, I don't have the answer to that. I'm trying to figure it out. I'll tell you this much. 13 years ago when I came to House of Friendship, I didn't know what the word overdose meant. Never experienced it. My first 6-7 years, I maybe get a phone call once or twice a year about someone passing away in our shelter, but you know, like a heart attack or like quote unquote normal reasons. In the last 6-7 years, overdose is a regular occurrence. It's part of your shift. And so what keeps me up at night is, you know, when I started my career working in a shelter in Toronto, at Covenant House, and I think about my starting career and the stuff I had to see and deal with, and now the young people that are working in our shelter today and what they have to see and deal with, it's night and day. They're paramedics, they're first responders. They weren't trained for that. And so they're seeing some of the outcomes of kind of the time that we're living in, and it concerns me. Of course, we try to do everything we can as an employer, from, you know, from if there's counseling needed, if there's spiritual support needed, if, you know, we have a benefits plan that provides all that. You know, we try to work really hard on being a supportive team. But you're right, Mike, like, you can't unsee certain things. And now part of it, when you go into this field, like you kind of know you're gonna do this. And so I always tell our team members, and Jeanette heard me say this last week, is people that serve at House of Friendship are not normal. And I have to tell them that. And some of them have never been told that. They think they're just normal people. They're not. Normal people do not put themselves in that situation. To see that level of pain and hurt, most of us wouldn't do that. But I'm grateful that some do. Some do it because they've had their own pain, or because they made their own faith, or they're feeling called to it. We should be incredibly grateful for those folks. I'm incredibly grateful for them. I don't know how they do it. I don't know if I could do it anymore, day in and day out. So, good question.
I wanted to ask you, mentioned that you, before COVID, you tucked that in there, that you had 1,700 plus volunteers. What's the situation?
Yeah, so we're slowly coming back, and you know, starting to, like everything, right? You're reconnecting, we're reconnecting, so volunteers are coming back, and you know, most of our stuff had to continue. We couldn't shut down our addiction treatment or house, so we never stopped through COVID. We did some stuff virtually, but then, yeah, volunteers weren't really allowed to use them, right? But no, we love our volunteers, and we're bringing them back in droves, and yeah.
And do you have to recruit, or do you have people that you know, certain requirements that they have to do?
It's a mix. There's some that have volunteered with us forever, and then there's some, we're always taking new. It's pretty clear on our website. The opportunities are available there. We have a great volunteer management individual that connects people. We want to connect to what you're passionate about, strength, like what are your strengths, what do you want to do, because we might not be the right fit for you. But we don't want to just give you some random role just so we could say, oh, you volunteered. So we do a bit of a process.
You mentioned a good story about these children that you were helping.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear so much of the homelessness and the drugs, you know, the drug overdoses and that kind of thing. Is there some way of getting a balance of the stories out, that services that House of Friendship is actually presenting?
Yeah, sign up for our newsletter. I'll give
No,
you
but
a
I'm saying just the wider population, not just the newsletter, but so that, you know, so that people in the general population, like, you know, I mean, I think too often everything is negative, negative, negative. And I think every once in a while we need to hear the positive.
So I hear you 100%, but we're working against social psychology. Social psychology, the way we're wired as humans, you know, from the cave days, like, we're afraid of danger, right? And so our brains are more attuned to threats than they are good news. Good news is like a bonus, but we're actually always ready. And so media knows that, right?
But they don't.
Right, so great example, the Clausen sisters, well, I can't call you Clausen sisters because you're not a Clausen.
No.
The sisters came to our dinner. We had a House of Friendship dinner on October 22nd, and I had 550 people there, and I shared 15 supportive housing projects that have happened in our community in the past 2 years, are currently happening or are about to happen. I asked 550 people how many are aware that all these projects were happening in our community. I think 4 people put up their hand. But all those projects were in the paper. But one was a few months ago, one was 6 months ago, and so they were there, like you were told about them. But every day you open up the paper, you read about encampments, 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 homelessness, homelessness, homelessness. So guess what? Where does the good news go? So it's not that we're not trying, it's not that the good news isn't out there, there's plenty of good news.
I'm putting this more on the point of the media.
Yeah,
and
but they're doing what sells.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because too often we miss out on the good stuff that's happening.
Partially, I guess I want to throw the challenge back to you is, I think it depends on what you're feeding yourself, right? Like there are plenty of opportunities. You know, I think for those who volunteer, get involved. That's what I always say to people: get involved, because then you get a different side of the story, and then you're around other people who are trying to do something, and then you become more hopeful yourself. But yeah, if we sit at home and just read the news, like, it's the quickest way to get depressed.
How does the connection with the people you serve primarily happen? Do you get referrals from other community agencies? You know, whether it's the children of immigrant families that have come into the community, how are you finding out about where some of these people are and connecting with them?
Yeah, I mean, the individuals that need our services are very resourceful. They help each other. You provide a good service, the word spreads. Like, particularly with kids and youth, like we're, like in those neighborhoods, we're present, right? Like we're right in the community center. It's often where moms or the kids will come through anyways, and then we'll just start building relationship. Relationship is the best way. Yeah, you can do referrals, but like all of us, it's always best when we connect on a human level, and that is what works best.
So staff and volunteers are going out,
Yeah, for some different programs and that, yeah.
I'm just thinking about the people who are standing on the medians. Are House of Friendship people actually engaging them as well, being proactive with them, or how is that working?
So are you talking like folks like that are panhandling and that?
Yeah.
No, we're not. So for those folks, maybe we wouldn't be going out. But what I would tell you is like folks living in encampments, folks under bridges, like maybe not us, but definitely Working Center has an outreach team, Sanguine has an outreach team, in Cambridge Aqua does that. And I just think the world of those individuals. Anyone who's willing in the middle of the night to put on a backpack and go into like places you and I would never want to go, and is willing and builds relationship, trust, and tries to do what they can for that individual, that's holy groundwork, folks. So we don't really do a ton of that kind of outreach. I would say Working Center and Sanguine would probably lead in that.
Just a quick question, being somewhat of a numbers person.
I asked, are there accountants, numbers people? Only he put up his hand.
What percentage of the funding required is given by government?
Yeah, good question. So House of Friendship is very blessed, and it's the reason we can do entrepreneurial things, we can do things a little different, because we're only about 2/3 government covered. So a third is folks like yourself supporting us, community foundations, family foundations. So that is significant for us because it allows us to do the right things in the community when no government is willing to fund us. Great example, opiate crisis, addiction's going through the roof. We built a $5 million addiction treatment center in Cambridge without a penny from the government. Why? Because we have to. Like, people need addiction treatment. We needed more of it in our community. We probably could have waited for the government for about 10 years to go through the whole capital funding stream, but we just didn't think that was the right thing to do. So we're very fortunate. We're very blessed. Now, we've been in the community for 83 years. Like, we've built a lot of trust. So the donations to House of Friendship, what we try to do is we try to use them as a way to, not just to keep the lights on, but to do kind of the new thing that's needed in the community. And so that gives us, for the business people in the crowd, I would say that's our competitive advantage as a charity, is people investing in us, and that allows us to do different things. Because otherwise we just keep doing the same thing, because that's all we would have the funding to do, right? If you only rely on government funding, you get kind of caught. So we're a third from the province, a third from the region, and then a third donations.
Given that we're getting close to the end, maybe the unanswered question should be
Yeah,
asked.
I love it. Let's dive in. So this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation, so I'm just heads up now. And I don't have the answers. Like, I'm still trying to figure it out. I will tell you what I've seen and what I've experienced, and you can do that with as you will. And the sad part when it comes to addictions is a health issue. No different than cancer, diabetes, but we still want to treat it as sort of a moral issue. And there's a lot more judgment about someone who's struggling with addiction than someone with cancer or broken arm.
Yes, that's
Can we acknowledge that part? So now, I think the particular part you're saying is, why do we have consumption treatment sites? Why are we giving drugs to people who are already addicted? Aren't we just enabling them? Aren't we empowering them? Here's what's happened in the broader environment. So we've been talking about the opioid crisis, right? So since 1995, we've been handing out painkillers like candy. So we've got millions of people already addicted. Then, in the old days, drugs were plant-based. Okay, so cocaine came from a plant. You had to have a farm, you had to irrigate, you had to heavy investment to develop drugs. So while the opioid stuff is going and we're creating all these pain meds, at the same time, there's some really smart scientists who talk to the drug cartels and say, you can make synthetic drugs anywhere you want. Just get the chemicals, you don't need any farmland, it'll be way cheaper for you, you can make as much as you want, anywhere you want. So the drug cartels are, and again, for those of you from a business perspective, could you imagine if you could all of a sudden make a product way cheaper? You're not going to keep making it the old way. So they started making synthetic drugs, meth, started putting fentanyl in there, and then the drug dealers on the street are like, this is amazing. The old drugs, cocaine and some of these other drugs, yeah, they were addictive, but they weren't as addictive as the synthetic drugs. So now the drug dealers are like, we just won the jackpot. Because now we have a product that if I get you on it once, I've got a customer for life. Whereas with cocaine, I might have you, but you might disappear for a few months. Again, in business terms, you're not a regular customer. And what do we want in business? We want regular customers for the long haul. So I'm sorry to put it this crassly, but sometimes when we look at a problem from an economics model, it all of a sudden starts making sense in a different way. So there's a huge reward for the cartels because they can make it way cheaper. And the drug dealers, basically the distributors, are going to make way more money. So, and we've got a fertile ground in North America. We've had people addicted to painkillers. So the customers are already there. So let's start with that customer base, and then let's grow out. And so synthetic drugs have flooded our North America in particular for about 6 or 7 years. I can tell you it is absolutely devastating to watch because these drugs are different. These are chemicals that should not be going into our bodies. But let me ask you this. If you're living on the street, if you were sexually abused by your uncle, you've had a horrendous life, you can't get work, and somebody comes by and offers you a pill for $10 that takes all of that away, makes you feel great. Some have said to me, it's way more euphoric than sex. For $10, and it would wipe everything away, it feels great. In that moment, in your desperation, how many people are going to say no to that pill? They're not going to say, oh yeah, but the long-term effects of this are, and what they don't realize in the moment is the synthetic drugs of today, so A, they're a lot more cheaper, they're more affordable, I can get them more easily, but they are so addictive. Getting off of them is so difficult and it's devastating. And I've watched people on synthetic drugs, it completely changes them physically, emotionally, mentally. So I share that all as a backdrop to you, as saying we are in a new era. This is stuff none of us have seen before. There are no clear answers. We don't know. And so before we quickly jump and judge and say, oh, consumption treatment sites are bad or this or that, I'm not saying any of those is right. I'm just saying we're in a new era where we gotta try things differently. And what I would say to you is, let me ask you this. If your granddaughter had a terrible, terrible diagnosis of cancer and no treatment was working, but there was one treatment out there that could potentially help her, would you turn it down? And so I'm not here to say consumption treatment sites are the best thing or they're the answer. I'm just saying for a certain population, they help keep them alive and give us a chance to save them. So I'm not condoning them, and I'm not saying us buying a hotel and doing what we're doing in Waterloo is the silver bullet. All I'm saying is we are in a different time period that we have never seen before. And so let's not politicize, let's not judge, let's try things. That's what I'm just pushing for. And so what happens, unfortunately, with addiction, see, if this was cancer, we would be like, oh, we're so innovative, we're trying this treatment, and this treatment, and this treatment, and then what would we do? We would, in the end, after a few years, do a little bit of research, and we'd say, this treatment didn't work, this one didn't, but these two did, so let's get rid of these two. But we can't even do that in our field. We can't even try stuff because everything gets politicized, and we're being judged, and we're trying, like, again, I'm not here for it, but we've got to try stuff because we've got to learn and we've got to try it. And this is the problem with addictions, is it gets treated differently. And there's a lot of morality and judgment, and it's actually getting in the way. And I'm pretty sure if it was any other health disease, and if it was our grandkids or kids involved, we would do whatever we could. So I'm just asking you to just keep an open mind. And this whole notion that it further feeds their addiction. They are already so unwell, so addicted, and these synthetic drugs are so different than anything we've seen. The answers are not quite that simple.
I think it's helpful that you put the cancer, like that's a good metaphor. I think the challenge is when someone gets the diagnosis of cancer, there's an inner battle of like, I can fight this. And we're losing the battle downtown in the inner being of, I can fight this. And I think that's where creativity really needs to be sparked. And how do we approach people inwardly, as Brad said, with youth and young adults, anxiety, depression, how do we combat this inner, like when someone gets cancer, there's a belief that they can fight this. There's no belief that there's any, no, it's just survival right now. Right?
Yeah.
So,
and Mike, really, like, what's behind all this? How did we get here? Why do we have so many kids and youth anxious and struggling with mental health, depression? Why do we have so many folks? Why do you even want to take the pill in the first place? Because you don't feel like you belong, you don't have a community, and that's where I think faith communities are so important. Like, and we've got to figure out a way to connect, and so people feel like they belong. Because when you belong, you don't need a $10 pill to wash everything away. Belonging is the best feeling that you can have. It's the reason you came out this morning, to see each other. And that's what many people in our community don't have. And that is truly the long-term answer. That solves all of our problems. Right now, these are all Band-Aid solutions. So I will agree with you on that. These are all Band-Aid solutions that we're trying. They're not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is here.
I think there's a misconception with the safe consumption sites as well, that it's allowing people to do drugs who wouldn't be doing drugs if it weren't for the safe consumption site, right? And hence the enabling, right? Like, oh, we're promoting drug. No, the drug use was going to happen, but it was going to happen in a place where people are dying all the time, constantly, right? And so I agree, it's not the solution, it doesn't solve the problem, but does it give us a chance and buy us some time to come up with better solutions? Because doing nothing is worse.
So Can I leave?
3 o'clock.
I just wanted to say that the drugs are available to kids so young too. Whether if you haven't gone on to painkillers, we found out through experience that kids can get it. They've been offered it as young as 15 in hockey and other sports. And at school, I have a friend who she's just been in agony with her daughter because they took her years to find out that she first started stuff when she was about 12 or 15 at school. And my husband taught at Cedar Break. I was a teacher as well. It's out there, and that's why Brad's asking us to come on board as mentors and be those people, buffers in their lives, or to have good youth programs to give kids a place to go and be safe and be, just it's so important that we do what we can. Maybe we can't go under the bridges and things like that, but we can help promote and support our youth. It's so important right now, the stuff that they're offered, the stuff that's available to them is just so different than what we are doing.
Let me leave you on a hopeful note, because you didn't come here to get depressed by me. So let me just, a few closing remarks. So, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is community. So, I'll just leave that comment. Agree with you 100% for our young people. I've had this conversation with my kids. When we were growing up, for some, the recreational drug use was a rites of passage, or was this kind of thing some people did, and it was fun. You cannot do that in today's context. And that's what, for those of you who want to go a little bit further, there's a book called The Least of Us by Sam Quinones. If you really want to dig deeper into this issue, The Least of Us, written by a non-Christian, entitled his book The Least of Us. Ironically, he actually went back to Matthew 25 and said, there's some answers here for the problem we have. Non-Christian journalist for 30, 40 years who's been studying this, following this. I've learned a lot from Sam Quinones, The Least of Us. The drugs today, 80 to 90% are tainted. They've got dangerous stuff in there. So our kids and grandkids, you can't touch this stuff. It's Russian roulette. So I want to reiterate that. 2 things I want to leave you with. So one, I'm assuming a lot of you have grandkids here. Ask them to read this book. Maybe you should read it too. It's called Factfulness. 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. So to your thing about the good news part, what I love about Hans Rosling's book is he actually does statistics and data. He doesn't just say, the world's a better place. He actually proves it through data. And I actually made our teens read it because I think our kids are way more aware than we were at their age, but they don't have the resources to deal with all that. And every day they get this barrage of, climate change, the world is ending, this, that, and they're not given resources for hope and how to respond to it. So, and you gotta challenge, I love what you said, you gotta kind of challenge the message. Because the message we're given always negative. And so we have to challenge that. We have to do our own information. And folks, I wish it was really complicated, but it's not. And yes, times change and we have new challenges. But really, it really does come back to what you and I were taught as little kids. And what your pastors still teach you every Sunday. It really comes back to that. And what I always say is, the context, the principle of love thy neighbor has not changed for thousands of years. It does change in our lifetimes. I'm pretty sure that prayer group 83 years ago didn't think you and I would be talking about consumption treatment sites in a church 83 years later. But we are. Because loving thy neighbor requires us to have those kind of difficult conversations in today's context. And we could bemoan that and we could say, the good old days. But the reality is, folks, this is where we are today. This is where we're called to serve. And if we truly are the salt and the light, we got to figure it out. So thank you for doing that this morning. Thank you for this discussion. I really appreciate our time together. Thank you.